Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and today, instead of the regularly scheduled programming of uploading my Inside Number 9 series breakdowns, I will simply just review something else. And yes, I did say that I was going to post something else tomorrow. I usually stick to a schedule of having 2 episodes per day uploaded. So instead of actually, doing both series breakdowns of Inside Number 9, I thought I'd do something a little bit different for this particular video, where I will be talking about a film released in 1992 called Bad Lieutenant, starring Harvey Keitel and written and directed by Abel Ferrara. For those of you who don't know, Abel Ferrara is a filmmaker who first got his start in the 1970s with a film called Driller Killer, and this film is particularly notorious because it was featured on the government's list of video nasties list way back in the 1980s to 1990s. And given the film's reputation, if it wasn't on the video nasties list, it probably wouldn't be all that well remembered or really that well received, because I actually saw the film myself and it's nothing to write home about. In fact, a lot of the plot, I felt like, was just basically seeing this guy, who's played by the director himself, by the way, Abel Ferrara, was kind of a bit of a douche, and he really didn't have anything redeemable about him or anything like that. It just kind of felt like, oh yeah, he's a bit of a douche. He treats the people in his life badly, including his girlfriend. And for some strange reason, she keeps coming back to him, and I just kept thinking to myself, why should I care about any of these characters? Because they don't really care about themselves, nor do they really care about the people around them. So I felt like, why should I care? And thankfully, at the very end, at sort of like the climax of the film, she does eventually get away with him and end up with someone else. But then he goes on a killing spree halfway through. He's an aspiring artist, and he kind of gets either too stir crazy and ends up, just killing people with a power drill, and it just gets insane from there. And I'm not even joking, there is literally a scene where two people, the main character and his flatmate, are basically discussing where they should put a hole in a door for the power drill to go through. And that's something that I really kind of felt was, it took too long, and it just kind of kept making me think, well, what's this scene supposed to do? Is it supposed to highlight how, the dynamic is between him and his flatmate? What's the real issue? What's the real thing that's being established here, other than the thing that we all knew from the very beginning, which is he's not a very nice person and a bit of a douche. So yeah, not a very good first outing, but there have been other great directors who have had not very good films and have gone on to have these very exceptional careers. So this wasn't the end for Abel Ferrara, thankfully, because in 1992 he made a little film called Bad Lieutenant, starring Harvey Keitel, who around the same time, or I think this film had just been released, I think he was fresh off the Reservoir Dogs set when he made this film, and you can definitely tell. I mean, this definitely feels like a very post Reservoir Dogs type film. If this was made before, I'd be actually quite surprised, because honestly, it does give you that feel to it. And Harvey Keitel in this is absolutely wonderful. His performance is literally the shining star in this entire film, and it's about a man who is a lieutenant, and he's a pretty bad person. He takes drugs, he has sex with prostitutes, he robs from crime scenes, he deliberately kind of, changes things to look like, oh, I'm doing this for career purposes. Like, he takes a bag of cocaine at one point from a crime scene, and he just says, oh, it's just for evidence. And he literally does that stuff. He even has an argument with a couple of customers and a shop owner, and they basically arrest both the customers of the shop because they get into an argument, and they arrest the man who owns the shop, and his granddaughter is literally standing right there and literally behind one of the shelves, literally doing what children do. Like, she's really terrified, and she's really worried for her grandfather, and he just literally sits there and he grabs an ice cream off a shelf, opens the packet, pays the money, and then he says, your grandfather will be back in a minute. But I kept thinking to myself, you're so heartless. And I really do love that about this character. I love the fact that he's just this really horrible person, and there's no save the cat moment for this character. He's literally despicable, and he doesn't have anything redeemable about him other than the fact that he's someone who has a family. But even then, he doesn't treat his family all that well. He wouldn't be called a bad lieutenant if he was a nice person. And so he isn't nice to his family members. The only time when he actually is nice to them is when he, sees the communion of his daughter, and he literally, blows a kiss to her, and wishes her congratulations, which I really like. It shows that he has a bit of humanity, but not by much. And yeah, he isn't a very nice person. And there's even this one scene where he basically approaches these two girls who are teenagers, and he decides to, because their car is backfired and or literally run out of gas, and they're underage and they're not supposed to be out or supposed to be driving or under the influence, he decides to play a little game of you do something for me, I'll do something for you, which if anyone knows anything, knows that can't be good for anyone involved, or at least for one particular party involved. So yeah, that's the basic gist of it. And yeah, he isn't a very nice person. And throughout the course of this film, there is a plot. And one of the plots is that a nun has been raped in a church, and she pretty much is sort of the driving force of this entire plot, because you're wondering, is he going to try to track down the people who did this to her? And for the most part, he does not. But he uses this as a stepping stone to sort of, just plunge even further into the abyss. And that's one of the things that Abel Ferrara's films do that I've realised through watching this film, is that he uses the very dark aspects of life, like the very dark and very seedy things, to retell a story about humanity, and to tell a story about, what made this person who he is, like this person who feels like he's as entitled as he is, and he's using his job, his position of power as a police officer, to pretty much get whatever he wants. What made him be this person? But in reality, that's not really what matters. What really matters in this story is, what does it say about the society that this particular character is in, New York City in the 1990s? And throughout the course of the film, there's a lot of horrible stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Like, there's a lot of murders that go on. There's one particularly grisly murder where two women are literally in a car, and they have literally blood stains everywhere, and there's literally, scenes where it looks like their throats have been cut. And it's really grisly stuff. I kept thinking to myself, my God, if I was in New York around this time, I'd probably feel very paranoid just to leave my house. Like, for goodness sake, all these terrible things are going on. But Harvey Keitel's character is the lieutenant, and I'm going to call him the lieutenant because he doesn't really have a name. He constantly, whenever he meets up with friends, they're always like, "Hi, how you doing?" They don't really reference him by name, and I thought that was a very weird choice, but it kind of makes sense because it's meant to be the point that anybody could be this person, anybody could play this role of the bad lieutenant. He could be anybody at any given time. But the whole entire basis is he's basically a bit of a gambler. He's basically a junkie. He's also an alcoholic, and he's also a bit of a gambler. So he's kind of this very toxic combination. And throughout the course of the film, he pretty much is placing bets on a baseball game that he's pretty much doing with a very dodgy character who may or may not be responsible for the series of murders that we're seeing throughout the course of the film. And it's not a very easy watch. There are a couple of scenes that make you think, my God, why am I watching this? This is just really grim and really depressing. But at the same time, what really pulls you through is Harvey Keitel's performance, because he gives such a layered and dimensional performance that you really just kind of feel like you do end up feeling bad for him, and you really do end up, really wanting him to get to the bottom of what's going on with this poor nun, and try to figure out what's the best way to handle this. Is this going to be a gun, guts and glory kind of thing, or what is he really going to do to make sure that this peace gets restored? And the whole entire thing is basically a redemption story, but to me, I think it's more him coming to terms with the fact that he's just a very terrible person and he can't blame his waning faith or anything like that on his problems. He has those issues and he can't get away from them. That's the point of it. In a lot of other TV shows and films, I think this would have been very, very kind of heavy-handed. But the way Abel Ferrara approaches it is he gives such humanity to this character, and he gives such, open-endedness to his arc. And it isn't a happy ending, because the happy endings in a lot of Abel Ferrara films are kind of non-existent. So if you watch an Abel Ferrara film, don't go into it thinking that everyone's going to make it out okay in the end, because chances are they won't. And that's one of the things I will say about this film, is it does end in a pretty bleak way, and it does make you think, oh, that was a really horrible film. But I really enjoyed, my time with it. It is a film that I would recommend, that if you're easily triggered, again, this is another trigger warning thing that I will say, if you're very easily offended by scenes of graphic use of drugs, or even the rape scene with the nun itself is quite graphic. So if you are triggered by any of those things, I would highly recommend giving this film a skip. But if you're not at all offended by any of those things and you can easily work your way through it, it is a pretty interesting watch, and it is a very, dark storyline. It's way better than Driller Killer by a mile, because at least the character in this, at least is played by an actor who can take these little moments that Abel Ferrara's put into the script and actually, rebuild off of them, because he is a talented enough actor where he can do that. And he's done that in the past with roles like, he would later go on to do films like, Pulp Fiction, and of course he just came off of the film Reservoir Dogs, so he's made quite a career for himself. And of course he worked with Martin Scorsese in the films Mean Streets and various other films like Taxi Driver and The Last Temptation of Christ and various other films, which also has a very religious theme in it as well. Obviously, with The Last Temptation of Christ, it is about the life and temptations of Jesus, whereas in the case of Bad Lieutenant, it is by and large mostly about a cop who is struggling to keep his head above water in a world that's very kind of dark and depraved and horrific. So yeah, that's my review for Bad Lieutenant, and I would definitely say give it a watch. It's a 4-star review for me. I would definitely give it a 5-star review, because I do think I was going to give it a 4-star review, but I do think a 5-star review is much better, because it is actually a really good film. It's very well worth the time, and it's actually very, interesting to watch. It's a very difficult watch at times, but you do find that because of that central performance, it's pulling you through, and that interesting storyline does get built up and paid off. And there's a very powerful scene in a church at the very end of the film, or towards the climax of the film, which I felt was some of his best performance of Harvey Keitel's, because he really just puts his heart and soul into this performance. And it's basically a scene where he gets the chance to actually confront his past and actually confront what made him, it gives you a hint as to what he basically does. And in order to go further into detail, I might have to issue a spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen the film, I would recommend checking it out. It's well worth the watch, at least for once. But if you haven't, I would definitely recommend checking it out at least once. But if you have seen it, then stick around. But if you haven't seen it, please click off the video now and leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. But I'm going to give you a moment to leave in case you haven't seen the film. But if you haven't seen the film, please leave and leave a like and subscribe, please, if you want to see more. Okay, so for those of you who've stuck around, the actual ending of the film, or the climax, as it were, of the film, which is essentially Harvey Keitel was in a church. He's just had a discussion with the nun who was horrifically raped at the start of the film, and they have a discussion about, redemption and revenge. Like, does she have a right to wish death or to wish pain and suffering on her attackers? But she just simply says, I'm a woman of faith, and I basically, have to just have faith that they're going to be reformed, and that I wish them well, because she even says at one point they were children of the church. They were children that she once knew. So the fact that, they used to be children that used to go to the churches and all those other things, and now they've grown up to be these horrible thugs, really tells you a lot about what society and what the city of New York in this film has done to these people. And it really is a great sense of, instead of, wishing vengeance and pain upon anybody, she just says, I forgive them. I forgive them because they are, they are blind, and they are, all sorts of things. But, because of my faith, I have to forgive them. And I do feel pain for myself, and I do feel pain for them. So I feel all these things. And he just simply says, well, why do you get the chance to make that call? You're not the only woman in the world. And that's the thing that, really kind of, sets the real contrary. Because part of me feels like it is true what both are saying to a certain extent, because not many people, after going through a horrific experience like that, would want to forgive as easily, because that's one of the things that really is kind of at the heart of the film, is that should he basically take the law into his own hands, use his position of power to take the law into his own hands, or should he actually do the right thing and actually see what these people are dealing with and what their lives are like? And they're both right to a certain extent. He's completely off the mark in the sense that, he says you don't want them to pay for what they did to you, and of course they could do this to other people. But he's also right in that respect as well. That a lot of people who would undergo that sort of experience wouldn't want to forgive as easily as she has. But it's a very powerful scene, because Harvey Keitel afterwards basically just goes completely off the rails, and he just has a great big shouting match. All the while he's seeing a hallucination of Jesus, and he isn't the glowing white-robed figure that we all know from the Sacred Heart of Jesus pictures and all the rest of it that we Catholics have, known our entire lives. He's basically shown to him in his, beaten, broken, and pre-crucified form, where he's pretty much, he's not angelic. He's very kind of sad and confused, and it's a very heartbreaking image just to see him down the end of that aisle and basically looking at Harvey Keitel, but we don't see Harvey Keitel's reaction when we're seeing that image of Jesus down the aisle. We're basically just seeing the image of him. He's bloodied, and he has the crown of thorns, and he is literally just looking at Harvey Keitel's lieutenant, and he just has nothing really to say, because he's just seeing this man, just basically a broken man, basically pull his heart out and shout, "Where were you?" Addressing him directly and saying, where were you when this horrible thing was happening? Where were you? You're supposed to be, this all-powerful, all-seeing entity. Where were you when one of your children was being, violated? And that was something that was very powerful, because it really kind of read to me that he was saying something more to that, and he was basically saying that, he's basically saying, because he is a religious person at the very start of the film, it's very easy to say that his faith has kind of let him down, either through some trauma that he himself has experienced, or it could be the fact that he's basically just lived in the city of New York, which is very sinister and very depressing, a very depressing place to be. I mean, certain people, if you live in New York, it's very loud and it's very busy and it never sleeps. There's a reason why it's called the city, it never sleeps. But the fact that he's lived in this city where all these horrible things are going on, it really goes to show that, he pretty much has let this thing take its toll on him, on his mental health, on his physical well-being, on the way he behaves. So he just kind of has this, you think he's going to have this attitude like, I need to make changes. He doesn't have a Batman type epiphany and say, I can be a symbol for hope. He just basically has given up and said, what, if you can't beat them, join them. And that's kind of awful, but at the same time, it leads him to these attackers, and he gets them in a car, and he takes them to, instead of taking them to the police or taking them somewhere private, because you think he's going to do either or, he's very angry and he's switching back and forth between these two very different variables of enraged, and you think to yourself, oh, he's going to go to the police and he's going to, do his job finally, do what he's meant to do as a lieutenant, but he doesn't. And you think to yourself, oh no, is he going to take them somewhere private and is he going to kill them? And a lot of people will probably have a very blasé reaction to it and say, you know what, good for him, that's fine. But he does one better, and I think he actually becomes a much better person for it. He goes to the bus station and he puts them on a bus and he says, here you are, and he gives them this money that he basically obtained just to pay off a bet with this very horrific criminal mob boss character that we don't see. And he pretty much just says, your life isn't worth anything in this town and you need to go somewhere else and go somewhere better, because this town's not going to help you when you fall off the rails. And that was very powerful to me. But the fact that he basically went back to his car defeated, knowing that he needs to pay off this bet, but he's given his own means of making sure that happens with him when he gave that box of money to those men. And it really is quite powerful. And of course, the use of Pledging My Love by Johnny Ace in this film is really well done. It's a very haunting piece of music, and it was even used in the marketing of the film. The first trailer literally opens with the opening chords of that song. So the fact that it's a constant presence throughout the course of the film really does tell you everything you need to know about where this film is going and what it wants to achieve. And the trailer even begins with a quote from Paradise Lost, which is, every man has the ability to make a heaven or hell of their own existence. And when a film trailer opens with a quote from John Milton, you really do kind of feel like you're in interesting territory. And this isn't just going to be your run-of-the-mill driller killer type affair where it's just going to be excess blood and gore, strong language, really off-kilter audio. It's all going to be pretty much, standard, interesting discussions. But he does so much with so little, and I think that's something that really is incredible for both Abel Ferrara and Harvey Keitel. So this is a 5-star film all the way for me. I will, if you like this review, I'll review more films of this caliber, but my next video today will be on the 3rd series of Inside Number 9. And the first episode, I want to take this video to also ask the question of my viewers. Leave a suggestion in the comments. Would you like me to do a separate video of the episode The Devil of Christmas and save it for December? Or would you like me to include it as part of the entirety of Season 3? I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you have a very good day. Have a good day and ciao.